We now discuss corporate management, specifically the board of directors. When you take a look at the management of a corporation, there are three levels of control in the corporation. Okay. The first would be the board of directors or the board of trustees in a non-stock corporation. The board, as mandated by the Corporation Code, shall exercise all corporate powers, should conduct all business, and control all the properties of a corporation. Based on that mandate, it would appear in the hierarchy of corporate management, the board is on top of the officers, the stockholders, and the members. This is really a matter of convenience, where your stockholders and members give up their right to participate in management so that the corporation can be run in a more convenient manner, especially when it deals with third persons. So third persons simply transact with the board or through a representative authorized by the board. Below the board in the corporate hierarchy are corporate officers. The revised Corporation Code provides for a listing of corporate officers, which we will discuss at a later date. But primarily, you have a president, and you have a secretary, and you have a treasurer. And presumably, at the bottom of the hierarchy, you have your stockholders in a stock corporation and the members in a non-stock corporation. While they may be found at the bottom of the corporate hierarchy, they are considered as having residual power over fundamental corporate changes as required by law, and they are given the right, or they may exercise this right by voting. If you have gone through the provisions of the revised Corporation Code, there are certain matters that require either a two-thirds vote or a vote of the majority. These are the changes that are considered as fundamental or substantial, and they cannot take place unless they bear the conformity of the stockholders or the members to their vote, which is either two-thirds or a majority. In connection with the exercise of corporate powers, the board and the officers are to some degree insulated by what is known as the business judgment rule. The business judgment rule provides that courts or the Securities and Exchange Commission cannot interfere in the actions undertaken by corporate management unless they are so unconscionable and oppressive so as to amount to a wanton destruction of the rights of the minority. And as long as they can show that they were undertaken in good faith, courts and the Securities and Exchange Commission cannot review them. To illustrate, if the board has decided to undertake a particular transaction and has given instructions to corporate officers to undertake the transaction, if the transaction later turns out to be a losing proposition for the corporation, can an action be brought as against the board and the officers for undertaking that transaction? The general rule is no. The basis is the business judgment rule. As long as that transaction was entered into in good faith and cannot be characterized as unconscionable or oppressive so as to amount to an wanton destruction of the rights of the minority, then that transaction will stand. What about the losses that may have come about on account of the transaction. Those losses will have to be borne by the corporation, because there is really no guarantee that each and every transaction that is entered into will be profitable for a corporation, or the results at least will be favorable to the corporation. Of course, the responsibilities that are imposed upon corporate management seeks to minimize those consequences. Let's now go to the election of the members of the board. Initially, let's talk about the term of the members of the board. If you are talking of a stock corporation, the term is 1 year. If you are talking of a non-stock corporation, they are elected for terms not exceeding 3 years, and each director or trustee shall hold office until his successor is elected and qualified. When we discuss the qualifications later for election as a director or a trustee, one of the conditions is that your director should own at least one share of stock in his name, and he must hold ownership of that share of stock for the entire duration of his term. In the same manner, in a non-stock corporation, the trustee must be a member and must continue to be a member during his term. We now go to number. How many directors are to be elected? In a stock corporation, 15. In a non-stock corporation, it can be more than 15. Previously, under the old corporation code, or Batas Pambansa Bilang 68, we were talking of a number no less than 5 but no more than 15. Now, what the law provides would be the maximum number. In a stock corporation, it is 15. In a non-stock corporation, it can be more than 15. And in our readings, I had asked you to take a look at Section 106. Section 106 speaks of a non-stock educational corporation where the trustee should be no more than 15 but always in multiples of 5. These multiples of 5, during the initial formation of the non-stock educational corporation, you have 1/3 of the 15 or 5 actually serving for 1 year, the rest for the next third for 2 years, and the last third for 5 years. I also ask you to take a look at Section 96. In Section 96, we refer to a closed corporation. There is the possibility that in a closed corporation, there is no board as long as the stockholders have come into an agreement that they will manage the corporation by themselves. And what was introduced by the revised corporation code, the one-person corporation, where there is no board, and likewise previously and up to now, when we speak of a corporation sole, where there is also no board. Part of the board would be, in proper cases, what are termed as independent directors. Section 22 provides for certain kinds of corporations that will require the election of independent directors. And your independent director should constitute at least 20% of the board. So specifically, if we do an illustration, if you have a 5-member board, at least one of the directors should be an independent director. If you have 10, then at least 2. And if you're talking of 15, then at least 3 of the directors must be independent directors. The main purpose of having independent or requiring independent directors is to minimize the incident of fraudulent conduct. And it is assumed that when you have independent directors, they will be independent of traditional management in a corporation, and they will point out or take issue with actions undertaken by the board, which to their mind is prejudicial to the corporation. So when are independent directors required? Section 22 tells us that they are required for corporations covered by Section 17.2 of RA 8799 or the Securities Regulation Code. So here we are talking of corporations that are listed on the stock exchange or corporations with assets of at least 50 million pesos, having 200 or more stockholders who own at least 100 shares each. The second class of corporations that are required to have independent directors are banks and quasi-banks, non-stock savings and loan associations, pawn shops, corporations engaged in money services, pre-need, trust and insurance companies, and other financial intermediaries. By the way, at this point, I'd like to point out that when we talk of non-stock corporations, they may still require independent directors. These non-stock corporations requiring independent directors are your non-stock savings and loan associations. Third, other corporations engage in a business vested with public interest similar to those which have been enumerated under the law. So those are the 3 classes or classifications or groups of corporations that require independent directors. And how do we define an independent director? An independent director is a person who, apart from shareholdings and fees received from the corporation, is independent of management and free from any business or other relationship which could reasonably be perceived to materially interfere with the exercise of independent judgment in carrying out his responsibilities as a director. I'd like to call your attention to the guidelines that are promulgated and enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission as to the nomination and election of independent directors. There are 4 guidelines that we need to concern ourselves with, which I advise you to go through. And the other qualifications are ownership of at least 1 share, a college graduate, or has been engaged or exposed to the business of the corporation for not less than 5 years, and be a person of integrity, probity, and hardworking. There is really nothing to fear so much insofar as the guidelines. If this question may come up in the bar, it's really going to be concentrated on who is an independent director, the required percentage, and when they are going to be required. However, for our additional knowledge, let's discuss the other rules that apply to independent directors. So, an independent director in a stock corporation must also own shares because it is a requirement for election that a director should have in his name at least one share of stock and continue to hold that one share of stock during his term. An independent director is also required to own shares. However, there is a maximum percentage, and that is 2%. He can only own not more than 2% of the shares of the covered company and or related companies or be any of its substantial shareholders. And how are independent directors elected? They are elected by the shareholders present or entitled to vote in absentia during the election of directors, and they shall be subject to all the rules and regulations governing their qualifications, disqualifications, voting requirements, duration of term and term limit, and the maximum number of board memberships and other requirements that the SEC may prescribe for purposes of strengthening their independence and to align it with international best practices. So what are the term limits for independent directors? Before we go into a detailed discussion of term limits, independent directors are also subject to the general rule as to term. When you're talking of a stock corporation, they are subject likewise to the 1-year term. However, pursuant to SEC Memorandum Circular Number 9, Series of 2011, dated December 5, 2011, there are also prescribed terms. I'd like to qualify that when they serve the corporation, they are covered by the 1-year term. The term limits as stated in the SEC Memorandum Circular has something to do with the number of times or the number of years that they can be elected as independent directors. Specifically, a person can be elected as an independent director in any number of companies. So if more than 10 companies would like to have a person as an independent director, can he serve as an independent director in all 10 or more of those companies? Yes, that person can serve as an independent director. However, by way of a qualification, if we are talking of a business conglomerate where you have a parent, a subsidiary, or an affiliate company, okay, the usual standard being if the parent owns more than 50% of a corporation, then it is a subsidiary. If it is less than, then it is an affiliate. So if the person who wishes to become an independent director is going to be elected as an independent director in a business conglomerate which consists of several companies, then he can be elected as an independent director in only 5 of those companies. So if he's an independent director of the parent, he can only be an independent director in 4 other subsidiaries or affiliates, or a combination of subsidiaries and affiliates, so that his total directorships would not exceed 5. Speaking of the number of times that he can be elected as an independent director, the term limit is 5 years, and for purposes of computing a year, a tenure of at least 6 months is considered as a year. So if the person now elected as an independent director will be re-elected, he can only be re-elected for 5 times, so that he will be serving a term of 5 consecutive years. What happens when his 5 years or his term limit of 5 years will be interrupted? Like, for example, he only serves for 2 years, then he will no longer serve as a director for the next 2 years. May he be re-elected again on the 5th year? Yes. What happens to the first 2 years? Once he is re-elected again after a gap, then the 5-year period will commence to run upon his re-election. So going back to my example, he was already serving for 2 years. On the 3rd year, he is not elected. On the 4th year, he is likewise not elected. On the 5th year, he is elected. The 5-year period or the 5-year consecutive term limit will again commence to run upon his election on the 5th year. So he would still have another 4 years after his election on the 5th year. After he has served 5 consecutive years, he needs to undergo a cooling off period. And this is for 2 years. During that 2-year period, he should not commit any act that would disqualify him from being an independent director. Once he has already served the cooling off period of 2 years, he can now be elected again for another 5 consecutive years. Once a director has served a total of 10 years, then he is now perpetually banned from being or serving as an independent director in that particular company or in that particular business conglomerate, assuming that his 5 directorships and his 2 5-year consecutive terms were all served within the said business conglomerate. But does it mean that he can no longer be an independent director? He can still be an independent director. He is only term barred insofar as the business conglomerate or that particular corporation where he has served as an independent director for the period stated in the SEC Memorandum Circular. Furthermore, the same SEC Memorandum Circular also covers a regular director who will be appointed or elected as an independent director. Here we are referring to a director who has been elected by the stockholders to serve as a director and is not within the classification of an independent director. A regular director who resigns or his term expires would need to undergo a 2-year cooling off period before he can be elected as an independent director. This means, if, for example, Director A is a regularly elected director, not an independent director, and subsequently thereafter, he is no longer elected as a director, or he has ceased to run for election as a director, he may be elected subsequently as an independent director. But his election as an independent director will only come about or can only come about after he has served a cooling off period of 2 years. So, if he will run or will stand for election as an independent director within that 2 years, he will be disqualified. But if he does so after the 2-year cooling off period has expired, then he is qualified to be elected as an independent director. During my next discussion, I will be talking about the qualifications for election, together with the manner of election, nomination and manner of election, and eventually we will end up discussing the obligations and responsibilities of